Welcome back, everyone, to the front line with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo, as always, joined by Joe Rossinello. And once more, dear brothers and sisters, let us go into the breach on the Veritas Catholic Radio Network, 1350 on your AM dial, 103.9 on your FM dial, spreading the truth of the Catholic faith to the New York City metropolitan area. Please be sure to download the app, the Veritas app. Share it with your friends and family. You'll have access to all of our station's content, not just the front line with Joe and Joe. And Joe and I go live Thursday nights, 9 o'clock Eastern time, where we get a little bit more of the culture war and the spiritual battle and politics and all that fun stuff. And we go across X, Rumble, Facebook, and YouTube. So if you like our content, if you like these interviews that we do on Veritas, that we also post on social media, please help us out. Help us get to a wider audience. Hit a like, a subscribe, a share. Do all that fun stuff. So today's a conversation that's very dear to my heart because I, as most of you know, went to Seton Hall Prep in New Jersey and Seton Hall University. I was on the same campus for 9 years because I was on the 5-year college plan because I didn't do what I was supposed to do in my first couple of years. However, I love Seton Hall. I love the school. I always will. I am a pirate blue. And St. Elizabeth Dan Seton was a if I remember correctly, is the first American saint. Okay. And am I right about that, Joe? She was the first
Yes, she
American
is.
saint?
Yes,
Right.
correct.
She's the
And
first American saint canonized who was born in the United States.
That's right.
oh, okay. And
Solanus Casey's going to be next, sister.
Okay.
and so we have the perfect person to discuss this with us is Sister Betty Ann McNeil. Now she has edited a book that was written a while ago by Father Joseph Dirvin, and that book is Saint Elizabeth Ann Seton, a spiritual portrait. This is the second edition of The Soul of Elizabeth Seton by Father Dirvin. It's available at Ignatius Press, which I'll post a link to Ignatius in the description. Also, Father Fessio would want me to tell you, go to the local Catholic bookstore and ask them to, or tell them to put a few copies on the shelves, and they won't stay there that long. And I'm sure you can buy it at other big box places if you just do what everybody else does, which is Google it. So, Sister Betty Ann McNeil is a native of Virginia, a member of the Daughters of Charity of St. Vincent de Paul. She earned her baccalaureate degree in social welfare from St. Joseph College, Emmitsburg, Maryland, in 1969, and a Master of Social Work from Virginia Commonwealth University in 1975. In addition, Niagara University awarded her an honorary degree of Doctor of Humane Letters in 2019. As an author of the Vincentian and Setonian tradition, Sister Betty Ann's work's been widely published. She's conducted workshops, retreats, you name it, in North America, Europe, and Asia. Sister Betty Ann McNeil, welcome to the front line with Joe and Joe.
Thank you. Nice to be with y'all.
Oh, no, it's our pleasure. Joe Rossinello, I'll hand it over to you.
Sister, we always begin with a prayer. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary, never was it known that anyone who sought your help or sought your intercession was left unaided. Inspired by this confidence, we fly unto you, a Virgin of Virgins, our Mother. To you we come, for you we stand, sinful and sorrowful. Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not our petitions, but in your clemency hear and answer us, amen. In the name of the Father,
Hey, Joe,
Son. Yeah.
I just want to ask Sister a question, just out of curiosity. So my son goes to a really, really good charter school here in Arizona. I'm in Arizona. Joe's back in New Jersey. I got out of Dodge about 3.5 years ago. He goes to a really good charter school that's basically modeled like a traditional Catholic education, but it's a charter school. And one of his classes, I'm asking you this for me personally, one of his classes is humane letters. Could you define that for me? Because I'm like, well, is it history? Is it literature? Is it philosophy? What is the topic, humane letters?
Are you asking Joe or are you asking
No,
me?
I'm asking you, sister.
It depends upon the university, but I would say it's the classics, the traditional, the tried and true, the thinkers of the ages.
Okay. All right. Thanks for
And
that.
the prayer that Joe began with, the Memorare, was one of Elizabeth Seton's favorite that touched her soul deeply and her opened up her connection with Mary, the mother of Jesus.
Well,
Didn't know that. There you go. So, Joe Rossinello, where do you want to start?
Elizabeth Seton, obviously, as we said, she's the first American born saint. She had a little zigzag path to sainthood, which I love, to be honest with you. Many of the saints do, how God chooses them, picks them out. from the crowd because they're special. We're all special. We all can become saints if we will it. That's what we could learn from Elizabeth Seton. Speaking personally, I work on Wall Street, and I worked years ago, 20 years ago, from her shrine down by Battery Park. You've probably been there. I used to lecture there. I used to go to daily
Oh,
mass. It's where I
I thought
first.
you looked familiar.
You may have seen me there, sister. I lectured there. It was where I first started to go to daily mass. When I was working, I was in my 30s, and I began going to daily mass at that shrine. She has deep roots in New York City. Also, correct me if I'm wrong, St. Peter's
Yes,
Church, which also suffered when the towers came
yes,
down. It was a
definitely.
sanctuary for people who
Yes,
were basically running for their lives.
yes.
So, New York has deep roots and honors Elizabeth Ann Seton. With all that being said, a good place to start. Give us a little background on this great American woman.
Well, Elizabeth Seton certainly is a citizen of the world, to use her terms. She is a woman of New York, and she loved her native city. There's no question about it. She lived on Wall Street, number 27 Wall Street, when, as a married woman. She's a child of Dr. Richard Bailey and his first wife, who died when she was under age 3 and died in birthing the third daughter. So Elizabeth Seton's initial childhood experience that she remembered as an adult and recorded is that of losing her mother and her little sister and looking up to heaven to see if she could see them in the clouds. So the thread of loss penetrates her entire life, a thread of grief. She learned to overcome suffering. Her father remarried and it didn't work out with the stepmother. So she and her sister were sent to New Rochelle to live with an aunt and uncle. And her father went off to London to further his studies in surgery. And he became a very notable physician and is the first health officer of the Port of New York. But Elizabeth went through an adolescent depression, considered suicide at one point by overdose of laudanum. And then she met tall, dark, and handsome William McGee Seton of the Seton Maitland Company. They fell in love, true love, and they married, had 5 children. But the tragedy was that there was piracy on the seas. His father died, who was the manager of the firm, and tuberculosis overtook him. So, in a desperate effort to find a cure, they sailed to Italy, where he had friends and they had business relationships, but they were not welcomed by immigration at that point because the Italian officials, the Tuscan officials, felt that he had yellow fever, which had just broken out in New York. So they were quarantined for about 30 days or so. Finally, when they were released, he was desperately weak. The conditions in the detention center were horrible, and he died 2 weeks later. So Elizabeth Seton, at age 20, late 20s, was widowed in a foreign country where she did not speak the language, and her little daughter, her oldest child, was with her. She was a devout Episcopalian, and I maintain that the roots of her spirituality, of her sanctity, are in the Episcopal Church of New York. She was the guest of the Felici family, Italian, Tuscan Catholics, and they took her by way of hospitality to visit Florence, Montenero, and the churches of the area just as they practiced their faith routinely. And it was in that way that she was introduced to the Catholic faith. She attended her first Mass, and she had a deep experience of the Eucharist as the real presence at Montenero. Subsequently, she began asking questions out of curiosity about Catholics, and then from curiosity then to information, then for clarification. And one thing led to another. And when it was time to come back to New York, she really came back with a Catholic heart. But her Protestant friends and family were in opposition and religious bigotry prevailed. Shortly after she arrived, her dearest friend, her sister-in-law, who was a woman of faith with her, died. So Elizabeth had another loss. So she was a struggling widow with young children. She couldn't get a job after she finally decided to become a Catholic, and that was a very distressful period of discernment. She had a job with a couple who was starting a school, and she was to be a teacher. But within 3 months, the school hadn't begun but had failed financially. So she lost that job. She lost her next job because she was matron of a boarding home for boys attending St. Mark's School. And the parents didn't like the way she disciplined their darlings, apparently. They were also bullying her children who were practicing Catholics. She didn't know what to do. And by divine providence, one day, Father William Dubourg, a Sulpician from Baltimore, was traveling to Boston on a fundraising trip, stopped in New York, met her, and the light bulbs went off. He was an enterpriser, an entrepreneur. And he asked her if she would like to come to New York and start a school for girls, that they had a house she could live in, et cetera, et cetera. And that planning took a while, but she finally decided that she would move the family to Maryland. She got a lot of consultation in the process of her religious conversion through Father Bishop John Carroll and Cheverus in Boston and Francis Montignon. But she moved to Maryland in June of 1808, began her school, very small school, but a school for Catholic girls, so that they could learn the faith and be raised as educated ladies and women to be good Catholic mothers. And as fate would have it, her two boys were at Georgetown, and she went down to collect them because Georgetown's in the Washington area. And her friend, Father Michael Hurley, had come down for the dedication of the church, the chapel of the first seminary, St. Mary's Seminary. And he had a prospective seminarian with him, a middle-aged man in his 40s, a retired sea captain who had money. And he had to divest himself of his personal assets before ordination. So after some time, he had the idea of inviting Mrs. Seton to be the educational director or the matron of a school and supervise the continuum of human services. However, he specified it would not be in Baltimore. It would be in Frederick County, Maryland, the furthest you could get away, closest to the mountains, because Mount St. Mary's College had been started. So that gentleman, Father or Mr. Samuel Cooper, donated $10,000, purchased property near Emmitsburg, Maryland. She came with some other women who wanted to join her because by this time the Sulpicians had the idea, let's establish a religious community who could be the faculty for the school. And once you have a community, then you have perpetuity of the faculty, et cetera. So some women had joined her in Baltimore, 5 or 6, who really wanted to lead a consecrated life in community. Those women came with the children to Emmitsburg, and they moved into what is known today as the Stone House and established the first community of apostolic religious women in the United States, the Sisters of Charity of St. Joseph's, and began building a larger house because it was a tiny old farmhouse. And they built that house for her school and her sisters, they called it St. Joseph's House because she looked at the land where she was, and it was a sub-valley of St. Mary's Valley, and she named it St. Joseph's Valley. Therefore, she named her school St. Joseph's School, and from that developed St. Joseph's Academy and St. Joseph College. Women started joining her, more children came, and her school had 2 programs, one day school for the children of the area who were from economically deprived farmers, basically, and then children from wealthier Catholic families around and about who paid tuition. and that's how they survived. And through the Sulpicians, she was introduced to the rule of the Daughters of Charity of St. Vincent de Paul that he and Louise de Marillac had formulated in Paris when they founded the Daughters of Charity in 1633. And she adopted that rule. They got it from France, and it was translated by Father Dubois and adapted a little bit for the American culture. And they lived the Vincentian spirit and tradition and blossomed into 6 additional communities right directly from that root, of which the Sisters of Charity of New York are one. And she lived until 1821 as the mother of the Sisters of Charity, the headmistress of St. Joseph's School, and was dearly loved by the children, by the parents, and she was known best for her compassion. So that's very much of a summary, but she was the one who first planted the Vincentian tradition, like planting a seed in the United States. And this book that we're speaking about is also available here in Emmitsburg from the National Shrine of St. Elizabeth Ann Seton from the gift shop that is also online at setonshrine.org. She became the first canonized saint born in the United States. And actually, St. Rose of Lima is the first American saint. And then Mother Cabrini is the first American citizen to be canonized. So there's lots of details, but hers is a life of faith, the way she lived, her baptismal call to universal holiness. She's a model for men and women of this age who are single parents, struggling financially, struggling with family illness or loss of loved ones. There's hardly anything that she did not experience.
Sister Betty Ann McNeil is joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. We're discussing now. She's edited a book that had been written prior by Father Joseph Dirvin. The book is Saint Elizabeth Ann Seton, a spiritual portrait, second edition of the soul of Elizabeth Seton. I'll post a link in the description to Ignatius Press. So please go. We want to support our Catholic publishers as well as our Catholic authors. So please click on the link, go buy the book, tell your local Catholic bookstore, order a few copies, put it on the shelf. And I'm sure if you put it in Google, you'll be able to find it at the larger houses like Amazon and the like. Joe Rossinello, where do you want to go?
There's so much there
Yes.
to touch on. I just want to talk about that. She was a woman of means. As you were telling that story, I knew that. I was thinking of Mother Drexel, another woman of means. And as we know from scripture, those who've been given much, much is expected. And they lived that. They lived for heaven. They built the kingdom of God on earth through their means. That is so overlooked. In our country, we are so wealthy compared to the rest of the world. Obviously, we're all not Mother Drexel or Elizabeth Ann Seton wealthy. I sure as heck am not. But at the same time, compared to the world, we are wealthy. And the Lord expects us to give of ourself, our time, our treasure, our talents. Talk about that, because as you were saying that, that's what I was thinking. Just think, I mean, you're an educator. I went to the University of Scranton, a Jesuit college. I went to St. Peter's College. I got my MBA. Joe is educated in Catholic schools. I have 5 children. I send them all to Catholic school. As a result, my wife and I live in a shed because because we have to send them to a Catholic school, because that's just the way it is. With that said, if our Catholic people were to follow this woman's example, a person of means who put her money where her mouth is, just think of where the church would be. Just think about that. Talk a little bit about that to our audience and to us, because frankly, I strive to do that. My wife does as well. Jesuits teach us to be people for others. We are supposed to be people for others. That is the Catholic way. Your thoughts?
I think that is a very good point and very applicable today. The distinction that I would make is that Elizabeth Seton, coming from Dr. Bailey's family, And at the time in colonial America, where the American Revolution had just been in process, I would say that they were certainly middle class and a little bit above middle class because he was a doctor and he could afford to go to London for study. They were not mega landowners, to my knowledge. So I think there's a distinction between the level of financial wealth and with the Setons and the Drexels. However, as an Episcopalian woman, Elizabeth she and her friends gathered other ladies and established the first organization managed by women in the United States, the Society to Aid Poor Widows with Young Children. So that was an experience of service because it was not just giving out money. It was raising money to distribute to those in need. The Drexels had accumulated wealth, whereas the Setons, I would say, were accumulating money for their family. They were in the early tiers of America. But the obligation of giving, and this is what Elizabeth Seton seemed to have deep within her heart. She had experienced struggle. She'd experienced a degree of affluence. They were quite comfortable as a married couple, but she wanted to teach children whose parents couldn't afford to send them to school, and there was not education available for young girls. She took in orphans. This is, in Emmitsburg. She took in orphans. She shared what she had with those who had not, and sent her sisters to places of great need where we would call it acute poverty. And indeed, it was acute poverty because there was the anti-Catholic bigotry. And we often forget about that. And I'm thinking of the Philadelphia with the first Catholic orphanage in the United States that Father Michael Hurley invited the sisters to. And he had been a priest at St. Peter's in New York and her dear spiritual director early on. And in fact, he was the first candidate to enter the Augustinians. So he set the way for Pope Leo XIV, the Augustinian Pope now from the United States. But Elizabeth Seton and her sisters, through the Vincentian charism, were to seek out and serve persons in need. And the sisters were not wealthy. They had the bare essentials. This was rudimentary living in the backwoods, shall we say, to use her term. But they saw needs and they met the needs. And that is what I believe that the gospel calls us to. It calls us to love our neighbor, to serve our neighbor, and remember, whatsoever you do to the least of my brothers and sisters, you do to me. So Elizabeth understood that in serving the orphans, the children, it was an incarnational spirituality. She could see the face of Christ in persons in need. And she believed God is everywhere. And if you do a good deed, let's see, how did she put it? Carving each good deed kind of carves another image on your ring that you have to offer in eternity. So she knew poverty, and she knew convenience, and she knew how to share. And sharing our accumulated goods, our time, our wealth, and our talents is challenging to people today who are so encapsulated in individualism. And I think the post-World War II generations into increased wealth and affluence and goods. I'm a daughter of a widow, raised by an Episcopalian widow. And I remember the struggles early on. When I first was sent to Catholic school, my mother was so happy after meeting the principal, because when she realized that she was a widow and the semester had already begun, she got a discount on the tuition. She only had to pay $10 instead of $15. Times have changed.
No, they've changed all right.
That's the spirit of accommodating to people's needs. And people are in need because of policy and oppression. And no one should live in the midst of violence and terror. Although Elizabeth Seton knew terror and violence in New York City, she was present at the doctors' riot, and she was present when the Know Nothing Party were um, storming St. Peter's on Christmas Eve one
Yeah,
year.
the Know Nothings, that was an anti-Catholic group, right?
Yeah,
Correct.
Like that was,
that's right. So I don't
yeah.
know if I adequately addressed
No, you
your
did.
point,
No, you
but
did. I think
we
I
have
think
a moral obligation to care for the least of our brothers and sisters and anyone in need. We do.
Sister, we're gonna take a quick break in a minute, right? But I would say this to you. You mentioned individualism. If there's a good, really good first step for America, all right, if you want to keep it with our country for a minute, it would be to understand. And Joe and I, we lean conservative. I would say you could generally describe us as conservative guys, right? If there's one thing that conservative people in America need to get through their heads is something you just said. The building block of society is not the individual, it's the family.
Yes.
It's the family.
Mhm.
Prospering families, and taking care. And you mentioned policy, having policies that promote a strong family life on many different levels. That's your solution to really, or a really large, a great first step in solving a lot of our problems here in this country, is to recognize that we're all individuals in the eyes of God. We get it, okay? But as far as how we're supposed, the organizing principle, if you will, of America should be, how do we best support family life? You do that, and a lot of our problems start to go away. Sister Betty Ann McNeil is joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. So we'd really like for you to go out buy the book that she recently edited, Saint Elizabeth Ann Seton, A Spiritual Portrait. This is the second edition of The Soul of Elizabeth Seton by Father Joseph Dirvin. And you could buy it at Ignatius Press. You could support our Catholic publishers. You could ask your local Catholic bookstore to put some copies on the shelves, or you could go to Amazon or other places and certainly buy the book there. So you're at the front line with Joe and Joe on the Veritas Catholic Radio Network, 1350 on your AM dial, 103.9 on your FM dial. We are spreading the truth of the Catholic faiths in the New York City metropolitan area. We'd ask you to download the app and share it with your friends. You'll have access to all of our station's content. And Joe and I are all across social media, Rumble, X, Facebook, YouTube. Like, subscribe, share, do all that fun stuff. Help us out. So we have another great segment with Sister Betty Ann. We will be right back. Welcome back, everyone, to the front line with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo, Joe Rossinello. We are way in the breach with Sister Betty Ann McNeil. We're discussing a book that she recently has edited, St. Elizabeth Ann Seton, A Spiritual Portrait, second edition of The Soul of Elizabeth Seton by Father Joseph Dirvin, available at Ignatius Press. Click the link in the description. It'll take you right to the website, and buy the book there and support our Catholic publishers. And please ask your local Catholic bookstore to put a few copies on the shelves. Joe Rossinello, where do you want to start?
Well, Elizabeth Seton started Catholic schools in America. You, sister, went to Catholic school. You mentioned that on the other side of the break. Joe Pasillo and I went to Catholic school. Now, clearly, when we went, religious taught, and it kept the tuition low. Now that's not the case, sadly, and it costs a lot of money. We've had a number of people on the show over the 4 years that we've been on the radio, one of which was Bishop Strickland, who started a school in Texas. And this is a question I put forth to him, and I want to address the same idea with you, and I'm interested in your thoughts. We have to make Catholic school affordable for everybody. It's not fair because I'll just use myself as an example. My father was a barber, the son of an immigrant. I went to Catholic school on a barber's salary. My mother was a secretary. They couldn't afford to go to college. My mother was a smart woman. She ranked 10 in her high school class. She couldn't go to college. They put me to Catholic school. That's impossible right now. Just today, and I have an MBA, my wife has an MBA. We live in a modest home. We send our 5 children to Catholic school. It costs a fortune. Just today, I'm dropping my youngest daughter off at pre-K 4, and a boy walks past in the town just today, and he had a brown scapula over his shirt. He was like a meek-looking boy going to the high school, and I said a prayer for him. Clearly, his parents were Catholic, and they're concerned about him. He has a brown scapula over his shirt. Why should I be so fortunate to send my kids to school and that poor boy cannot go to Catholic school? This has to be a priority, in my opinion. Now, I'm not a bishop, I'm not a religious, but I am a father and I have a heart for children. And I felt bad. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Because this is something I know certain bishops are trying different things in Kansas City. We had another gentleman on here from Kansas City. If you tithe, that all kids get to go to Catholic school for free. They kind of work that out. I think that's great. That's thinking out of the box. We have to think out of the box. We have to give our kids a Catholic education, and it should not just be for people who are making a little bit of money. It's not fair. Our church is a church of the poor for the most part, and they deserve a Catholic education. Your thoughts?
It's a major issue today. It's part of the society of affluence that we live in, I think, and it's a part of the individualism that we mentioned earlier. But to put everything in context, we understand the United States from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean and up and down. But in Elizabeth Seton's day, it was the Eastern Coast. So the school that she began was the first free Catholic school for girls on the East Coast, taught by sisters. The Ursulines had been in New Orleans since 1797, and they did some education also. So it's inaccurate, although it's been said, Elizabeth Seton did not begin the first Catholic school in the United States, nor did she establish the parochial school system. John Neumann did in the Diocese of Philadelphia after her time. But the methodology that Elizabeth Seton used was consistency. Each of the Sisters of Charity school basically had the same game plan, shall we say, same curriculum, schedule, etc. So that standardization was a contribution of hers, plus the free education and focus on females, because there was no education or extremely limited education for females, and especially those who were from lower middle class families and who were not affluent. So I don't know really what the magic solution is for the universal availability of Catholic education for children, but I do know that when I entered the Daughters of Charity, Vatican II was in process, and it was so exciting to learn about the liturgy. The same month the Constitution of the liturgy was coming off the press, and to learn about the universal call to holiness and the significance of the common good and all that Vatican II taught, not only the details of liturgical changes, but religious women who were in formation received excellent education and formation, but the people in the pews did not necessarily, and the priests were so scattered in their preparation, they did the best they could. So my sense is that as my generation became parents, they're now grandparents, they saw what happened after Vatican II, at the time, post-Vatican II, of sisters leaving, priests leaving, and then lay people generously filling the gap. But Sunday school or catechism became, in my opinion, a lot of faith, fluff, and joy.
Oh, 100%.
So the substance of the tenets of the faith were not passed down with the level of intensity and integrity that your parents received or that you received in Catholic school. Therefore, those children are now the parents or the grandparents, and they really didn't get the training and the education. It's like we need adult education for everyone over 18 to reaffirm the commitment to family life, to responsible citizenship in society, and the faith. One of the reasons the Sulpicians wanted Catholic education in Baltimore for girls was to raise good Catholic young women who would be good Catholic mothers, nurture vocations in the family, nurture vocation to the priesthood, and that would help grow the Catholic Church in the United States as it was then. We have a decrease in priestly ordinations, although I think there's a little tick up, which is good news. Why aren't there sisters in the schools? Because there are fewer religious women coming to join a community. Fewer women want to live in community, a consecrated life, but there are more opportunities in the world, in the secular world, for women to have a profession. When my mother was growing up, and she was a graduate of the first class of the College of William and Mary in Virginia, teaching was a profession that women could go into. Nursing was a profession. Women have many more opportunities and choices for a reevaluation of values and values-based choices and decisions is required. Whether commitments are made to furthering career, is that furthering financial stability or raising families? They're individual, personal, and family decisions, but that's part of the reason that there are fewer women. When I entered, the year I entered, there were 70 of us, and that was in one province. So that was really from St. Louis to the East Coast.
Mm.
The next year, there were 35. Today, I think we have maybe 20 some under the age of 60. That's, you can't spread that many in classrooms. And also there were 60 children in classrooms, or 50 when I was growing up. So it is a different world, but gospel values are the same. And the church, the mission of the church is the same. We have the liturgy worship in English. We have the Vatican II documents in English. This is not an era of reading the Latin and trying to understand it. So the documents, the information is there. We need to take advantage of it. And technology has a positive role, can make a positive contribution, but we individually, it seems, are very tied to technology, creating a personal bubble. It's about choice.
Well, sister, let me ask you this. Sister Betty Ann McNeil's joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. So we're talking about a book that is out now from Ignatius Press, St. Elizabeth Ann Seton, A Spiritual Portrait, second edition of The Soul of Elizabeth Seton by Father Joseph Dirvin. Sister McNeil, she has edited this edition. Let's stay there for a second, Sister Betty. Here's one of the issues. I want you both were talking about what people, particularly Catholics, need to do. I'll give you an example of where to show that I think that the first thing we have to do is not let the enemies of the church and the enemies of Christ beat us back. I'll give you meaning we need to be courageous in the public square. All right. And why do I bring that up? Just several months ago, okay, a faithful Roman Catholic football player, okay, kicker for the Kansas City Chiefs, Harrison Butker, okay, beautiful guy, okay, solid in the faith. He gives a speech at Christendom College, all right, a solidly Catholic college, and he specifically addresses the females, and he says, this is great, everything you've done. These are accomplished girls, right? They're graduating from a very rigorous training at Christendom College, and says, but remember, Your most fulfilling vocation is going to be as wife and mother. They wanted to fire him. They want, if you want to talk about anti-Catholic bigotry, all he stated was, wife and mother, that's pretty important. In fact, you're going to find that that's the most important thing. And everybody was calling for the Kansas City Chiefs to fire him and everything else. And thank God others had the courage to come to his aid and said, he didn't say anything wrong. Why don't you all just go shut up? Okay? Because actually what he said was true. And we were actually backing him up, aside from the fact that he's an awesome kicker. But leaving that aside, but talk about courage, sister, because right now, if people want to point to the Know Nothing Party or the anti-Catholic bigotry of the 19th century, not a lot has changed. Not a lot has changed in America.
We do have to be a voice for others. And as Pope Leo has said, we need to be peacemakers by dialogue, by building bridges. I would add, we need to walk over the bridges. Remember, Elizabeth Seton, when she arrived in Italy, was welcomed by the hospitality of a Felici family. She was a stranger. She was a visitor. You could consider her a migrant, if in one term, but the hospitality, the care, the concern, the reaching out. Charity is a value and a virtue that endures forever, and God is love. Yes, and we have to respect others. We may disagree with their positions, and we sometimes have to make a prudent judgment of what is an appropriate response and have the courage to speak truth in the public forum, sometimes to speak truth to power, not in a tyrannical way or a negative way or a ballistic way. But if our faith is strong and we truly believe, then to articulate the good that needs to be stated, but it's not off the top of our head or at the heat of emotion. But we are called to be bridge builders, and we are called to speak the truth. Not everybody agrees with me on some instances, and I'm sure others don't agree with y'all on some points, but each person has their own perspective, and the gift of the Holy Spirit is within each of us. And we each are individual and we each have different ideas, but we are called to promote the common good of society, and that includes the least of our brothers and sisters. Now, one could have a dialogue in a proper setting of what did that gentleman mean when he said your vocation is to be wives and mothers. A vocation is different from a career.
Thank you for that, Sister Joe Rossinello.
Obviously, Leo the 14th understands American Catholicism because he was born into it. He went to
Yeah.
Villanova University. He grew up in Illinois. Um, what are your thoughts on how he will shape the American church? Clearly, Elizabeth Seton, being the first native-born American who was canonized, in many ways impacted the American church to this very day. I believe that Leo the 14th is the first pope to truly understand America. Now, I don't know. I mean, Francis was from obviously South America. His family came from Italy. I don't know if he had a deep understanding of America. He had an idea, obviously. He meets with his cardinals and bishops, but I do think sometimes he didn't understand the whole entire country. And to be honest, at times it seemed like he had a negative bent on things. I've read some of his homilies, and I understand South America. I've traveled through South America for work. The Catholics, in many cases in South America, at least the ones that Francis were addressing in homily, were very wealthy. and then you have dire poverty, and he came from that. So obviously that's going to shape you. I mean, you're a human being. He's a human being. Just because he's the Pope doesn't mean he's not human. We're all human. How do you think Leo the 14th is going to shape the American church? Because he does have a deep understanding of what's going on here. And obviously, that is going to have a thumbprint on Catholicism moving forward. What are your thoughts?
I am not a clairvoyant, but my understanding, my perception is, I worked at DePaul University for 10 years recently, and both of his parents were DePaul University graduates. And I was in Chicago the day the announcement was made. My sense is that the Prevost family were a middle-class family in a small townish area of greater Chicago who had intellectual gifts and had been educated and raised their children well. My observation of the current Pope is he is a citizen of the United States. He served in Peru for many years, and he has had global experience in his ministry with the Augustinians. Growing up in the United States shapes one's personality, one's mind, etc. He knows the United States from the inside out. He also knows it from the perspective of having joined a religious community in the United States. But he knows the people of God through the lens of the people of Peru, with their struggles and their poverty and their simplicity and their potential. So those are gifts that Pope Francis knew about the United States. When you say America, I'm specifically saying the United States, but he didn't know the United States from the inside out. So I think that's something different. He also is a very well-educated man, very bright, and a friend of his recently said to me that he was an introvert, which means that he is going to be thoughtful and not off the cuff. He is a thinker. I think he's going to be deliberate, but I think also he has a global vision, and he will move with a prudent pace. His experience from the dicastery of bishops, I think, is a gift to him as the Pope, because that gave him a wide viewpoint of who's who and what's what. In fact, Vincent de Paul was on the Council of Conscience in France, which helped identify who were the priests that would be good bishops. And at that time, before he began seminary work, many priests didn't even know the formula of absolution. So I think Pope Leo the 14th is a gift to the United States. I also think, to quote Elizabeth Ann Seton, what she described herself, he's a citizen of the world. And
I would agree with that.
I don't think that there will be radical changes on a fast pace. I think there will be deliberate progress in the development of dogma and the expansion of the church in hopefully bringing the youth into a more central role and into active participation in the church. With active participation in the church, many more young women and men will be open to lives of service in the church ministry, whether as lay deacons, ordained priests, or sisters. I think the aggiornamento of Vatican II is continuing, and I think it's alive and well. The Holy Spirit is with us. She has not gone away, and she is with us. Our diversity and our global awareness will increase through Pope Leo, I feel certain. If you look at the diversity of the College of Cardinals, et cetera, and some of his appointments, and certainly Pope Francis led the way. There's no question about it. So those are some of my thoughts.
No, they're good thoughts. I think, to be honest, to echo what you were saying, I think he's not going to shake the tree too much. I
Correct.
think I don't see that happening. I think he's almost like a Paul the Sixth figure. I think he's basically there to kind of reconcile like two polar opposite opinions that are going on in the church. He'll make peace within the church. And frankly, I also think he is a man of great depth and will be a blessing to the church. I do. And I think he's going to be a blessing to the United States. I truly do. And we should
I
all
hope
be.
he, I hope he will be an instrument for unity.
Oh, and
And
I think that's a lock. I think that's why the good Lord made him the Pope, to be honest with you.
He's a
Sis-
gift. He's really a gift.
Sister Betty Ann McNeil is joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo, Joe Rossinello, away in the breach. We only have a few minutes left. We'd ask you to go out and buy the book, St. Elizabeth Ann Seton, A Spiritual Portrait, second edition of The Soul of Elizabeth Seton by Father Joseph Dirvin. That's the book. Sister Betty Ann has edited this edition. It's available at Ignatius Press and others. We ask you to support our Catholic publishers. I'll post a link to Ignatius in the description. So, sister, let's spend the last couple minutes talking about her canonization, if you don't mind. So, why was it, in your view, so important at that time? So, she was canonized. Correct me if I'm wrong, by Paul VI in 1975. Am I right?
Yes.
Okay. And as you mentioned earlier, she's the first native-born American Catholic saint.
Yes.
Right. So why is that important? Why was this an important event for the Catholic Church in America at that time? We have about 3 minutes left. You have the floor, sister, for the next 3 minutes.
The canonization process I grew up with as a youngster in Catholic school. I remember signing a petition that to push the cause forward because it was going slowly. And at the beatification, I was right here in Emmitsburg, standing by the Seton graves by chance, attending a youth rally when the telegram came from the Vatican that she had been beatified, and the bells just rang and told for an hour, it seems. But I was one of the youngest sisters of the Daughters of Charity whose name was pulled out of the lottery to attend the canonization. So it was a magnificent experience for a young woman in her 20s. And just a couple of weeks ago, we had the 50th celebration here at the Shrine of Elizabeth Seton, which was a magnificent three-ring circus with each ring being executed superlatively. 3,000 people attended. But at the time of her cause, when the idea came, there was a mass being celebrated in the cemetery because of the 5th anniversary of the death of James Roosevelt Bailey, who founded Seton Hall University. And the celebrant looked out over the sisters afterwards and said, there's never been a saint in the United States. Maybe Elizabeth could be the first saint of the United States. And that was 1882. And then the process went through the diocesan and then the Vatican and 2 world wars. So everything was slow. But once, the miracles started coming in, the canonization affirmed the fact that the Catholic Church has a role in the United States and is right. The members of the Catholic Church are rightful members of citizens of the United States. In the face of the historic religious bigotry that unfortunately continues today. But the canonization gave a model for people. There's so many folks that come to the shrine and they say, oh, my mother named me Elizabeth Ann, or I named my daughter Elizabeth Ann. But it gave a role model. Elizabeth Seton is a role model for men and women in their vocation as parents, as wives and husbands, as religious women, as people who are committed to the gospel. And it also provided an intercessor in heaven whom Americans and people of the globe can turn to and know that they have a friend in heaven. Now, there was competition at the time of the canonization. Who would be first, John Neumann or Elizabeth Seton? Politics in the church, can be quite complicated, with different levels of hierarchy and personalities in different areas. But John Neumann was the second canonized of the United States, and he was an immigrant himself. So Elizabeth Seton is a woman, a saint for all ages, in my opinion, and she's a saint whom anyone can turn to, whether they're struggling as a parent, struggling with a child who won't go to school, can't figure out what they want to do, is considering drugs, has a terminal illness, or parents who have lost children. She buried two of her daughters. No parent should have to bury their own children. And for spouses who lose a beloved spouse because she had to bury her husband, she's a model for religious seekers, people who are seeking a way to God.
Sister, we have to leave it there. Unfortunately, we're up against the end of the show. Thank you so much for
So
coming on. You're welcome
informative,
back
sister.
anytime.
Honest to goodness, I learned a ton. I really did. And I'll be
Yes.
honest with you. You said you could hang with us. You sure can. I love it.
Well, I
So
hope
we
you
want to thank
to the shrine sometime. It was nice being with you. God bless.
Thank you, sister. Sisters Betty Ann McNeil. Make sure you go out and buy the book, St. Elizabeth Ann Seton, A Spiritual Portrait, second edition of The Soul of Elizabeth Seton by Father Joseph Dirvin. And sister edited this particular edition. It's available at Ignatius Press and other places. We ask you to support our Catholic publishers. Thanks once again for joining us at the front line with Joe and Joe. Make sure wherever you see us, help us out, like, subscribe, share, do all that fun stuff. And remember, until the next time, that our conversation is your conversation, and that conversation is going on everywhere. We'll talk to you soon.